Thanks for joining us with Unmuted with Marsha. A lot of emails coming in, and they're all about China, wanting to know what is happening with China. So there is no better expert on China than Gordon Chang. And I know you're seeing him on the Fox News every single night because he is the China expert. And I know it was short notice, Gordon, to get this Unmuted with Marsha up, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. So let's talk about this. Taiwan is an independent nation. They have self-governance, but China just wants to go back in time 150 years and say, no, you're all ours. So now they have started flying these fighter jets over Taiwan. So talk to me a little bit about what you know and what you think is actually happening here.
Well, yesterday, Senator, China flew a record number of its jets and other craft through Taiwan's air defense identification zone. And it was not just the fighters, it was also their H-6K bombers. These are nuclear capable. They look like our B-52s. And this is a stark warning. There's a number of things that are going on here. A lot of people say, well, just let the Chinese blow off steam. I'm really worried, though, because when we don't push back, the Chinese then try to push forward. They're doing things which means that eventually we're going to have to oppose them. And when we let them go too far, then anything can happen.
Got it. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think that Biden's weakness and the way he acted in Afghanistan, these are two things that were just kind of back to back. And then you put into this mix the fact that the Biden administration can't figure out what they want to do on trade with China. So there are three different avenues that the CCP is watching very closely. What kind of effect does that have on this China aggression that we are seeing?
Yeah, I think that there are two principal factors for why China's acting up right now. One of them is internal political infighting, and Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, needs an enemy. But the other one is what you mentioned, and that is they perceive the Biden administration as incapable. We know this because we don't have to speculate. They, as Kabul was falling, we saw their propaganda narratives, and these two narratives. One of them was that because the U.S. couldn't deal with the Taliban, it had no hope of countering a magnificent China. And the second narrative was that when Beijing invaded, and they sort of used the when, not the if, that Taiwan would fall in a couple days and the U.S. would not come to help. And I actually think that those narratives reflect, in fact, the thinking of the Chinese elites, because we have evidence that they really do believe those. So this debacle in Afghanistan just reinforced the worst instincts in the Chinese political system.
So what should the Biden administration do? And what should their approach, both in word and action, be? And then with the U.S. military, what should their approach in the region be?
I think the first thing is the president needs to get behind his desk in the Oval Office and publicly warn the Chinese and say that the United States will defend Taiwan. Okay. Then I think that we need to actually have our Navy have port calls in Chinese ports with our Arleigh Burke destroyers, for instance. And I believe we do need to do other asset injections into Taiwan. And the reason is that, yes, these are dangerous, but the point right now is that there are no good options. The United States, through some very bad Taiwan policies, some very bad China policies, have put us in a direction where now everything coming out of today is going to be exceedingly dangerous. So the last thing I think that we need to do is for the president to say to the Taiwan government, both in private and publicly, if you want a mutual defense treaty, we will begin talks to put one in place.
Okay. And people, going back to what you said about not if, but when, and the Chinese using that language when it comes to Taiwan, I've heard a lot of chatter from people saying, do you think they will invade Taiwan and attack them before the Beijing Olympics or after the 22 Olympics?
That's a great question. And normally I would think that they wouldn't, but my thinking that is mirror imaging. In other words, if
Okay.
I were China's leader, I wouldn't invade before the Olympics. But the Chinese leader has very different interests, and he calculates things very differently. And right now, he's in trouble. So he very well may decide that he should lash out, especially if he thinks he can take us by surprise because we're not paying attention. The other thing, Senator, is that there are two ways that World War III can start. One of them is that China decides to invade. The other is that China's, through its dangerous flights or its dangerous navigation on the sea, can cause an accident. And that accident could lead to a series of events that they cannot walk back. So it's not necessarily that Xi Jinping wakes up one morning and says, I'm going to invade. It's just that China's provocative and belligerent activities trigger history's next great conflict.
Do you think that they're watching closely? The US and some of our allies have put some of our ships in the region. Do you think that they're paying that close attention? Does that bother China, or do they just disregard it?
They pay very close attention because every time we send a destroyer through the Taiwan Strait, or anytime we have a destroyer on a freedom of navigation operation in the South China Sea, China puts its Navy right behind, tailing very closely. And then immediately we see a propaganda blast, which is coordinated with the Chinese military. So yes, they are very much aware of what we're doing in their peripheral waters.
Okay, well, that is all very helpful. You've been so kind to give us a little bit of your time. I would encourage all of you that are seeing this Unmuted with Marsha, you'll find him online at Gordon G. Chang. So catch up with him. Of course, I'm at Marsha Blackburn. Hope you'll stay in touch. We're going to follow this China issue very closely because it's important to note China is not our friend. China is an adversary. China wants to be globally dominant by the time we get to the midpoint of the century, and we cannot let them continue to be aggressive, not only in the ASEAN nations and their region of the world, but also globally. Gordon, thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator.